Dr. Hillel and Gemara weiter. We're right at the bottom line of Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Hashem and Shalahed. The Mishnah told us that one of the things that is ushered, that Chazal ushered, is oil from a goy. The Gemara, the Mishnah says that the Rebbe they matter it, but right now at the time of the Mishnah it says Hashem and Shalahen was ushered. Zogt Gemara, Shemen Rav Amar Daniel Gozer. Where is the source? Where did this start? Where they were geyser on the Shemen of a goy? It was Daniel the Navi, from the times of the Navi. He was geyser that we shouldn't drink Shemen of a goy. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel said no, it's a much more recent gzera, and rather it's because of Zili Fasan. Rashi says here, right at the bottom of Lamed Amud Beis, Pleitashan Shapoltin Umazin Shamnunis Isher Shabali. The kalim that the goyim used to use were full of chazatreif, and they used to store their oil in these barrels. So therefore, the barrels would absorb tam of Isser, and that's why the oil of a goy was also. Let's turn on to Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. So we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. So Rav said that it's also it's a gzera from the times of Daniel, and Shmuel says it's a much more recent gzera because we're concerned about the kalim that the oil are stored in. So the fasan shel kalim tameim oisrasim. It's the problem that the kalim that they used was tamei. So I a minute ago said it's because there's tarfus in there. But that I misspoke. The first stage of the Gemara thinks it's because the kalim are tamei, and that's why the oil is also. Frank the Gemara, since when is everybody makpid on eating everything b'tahira? Atu kula alma oichli taharis ninu. Let's not forget we're talking about the times that Tanoim, the Maroim, where we don't even have a Beis Hamikdash anymore. Is there such a concern that people should only eat their oil but tahira? Ella is the lifasan shal kelim asurin aisrasim. We're not worried about the fact that the barrels are tamei, but we're worried about the barrels having absorbed chazar or some other isser to eat. And if they store the oil in these barrels, that would make the wine also, the oil also, and therefore they asked for all oil. So Amar Shmuel Larav. Bishlama Lididi, Bishlama, according to my understanding, that this is a much more recent gzera. The aminas lifasan shal kelim asurin oisrasan. What answers the oil is the fact that they're stored in barrels that have treifus in them. Hainu, that would make sense. The Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa. The Amar, when Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa came along, he said the following: Dorish Rab Samloi ben Nitzivin. Rab Samloi gave a shir in the city of Nitzivin, and this is what he said: Shemen oil, Rabbi Yehuda ubeistinoi nimnu alav itiru. Rabbi Yehuda and this bezdin, he was a late Tana, said darshan that oil is now mutter. They were matter. They undid the gzera. So if that's what happened, it's what would be the reason for that? Why would Rabbi Yehuda have reversed it? Because kasavar nois and tam gam mutter. When the barrel, we know the loch is when a barrel absorbs the taste of iser, and those tastes absorbed the wall of the keli becomes 24 hours old, they are now called nois and tam gam. Now it doesn't literally mean that the tam that it puts into food, it will make it disgusting that you can't eat it. What it means is the tam that it puts into the food isn't such a good tam, but it's not like a terrible tam. And they hold nois and tam gam is mutter, which we actually hold like today. Nois and tam gam is mutter. And when they made it a kana, they must have held that nois and tam gam is also. So that's the case. That would make sense because it wasn't a gzera mishas hanavim. it was a gzera that a recent gzera that was only because they held that nois and tam levgam is aser, and Rabbi Yudah Beis Dinois learned, like we paskin, that nois and tam levgam is mutter. Elalidoch, the Amr Daniel Khazarlov, you Rav who learns that the reason why Shemin is aser is because he exeris hakadmoinim from the times of the Nevuah. Daniel Gozar, Daniel made exera, the aser of Yudah Nosi Mabatalai. Can Rabbi Yudah Nosi and Tana come and be Mavatal, the exera of a Navi? But none we learned. Ein Bezdin Yochel Mavatal Divrei Bezdin Chaveroi. A later Bezdin cannot be Mavatal the words of an earlier Bezdin. Elim came, Godol Himenu, Bechachma, Sign Chachma, and time meaning that they're bigger Bezdin and they have to be a more Chachmadik Bezdin, which is not likely to occur. So Oibazoi, it's fair on you, Rav. How was it that some Loi Darshan that Rabbi Yehuda reversed this? Reason Zera als Nois and Tam of Gam, he could reverse. But how could you suggest that he'll reverse Zera from Daniel? Now Tosfos had a little bit of difficulty with Pashat Pshat in the Gemara, like I just translated. So Tosfos says, "Kasover Nois and Tam of Gam is mutter." That's what Rabbi Yehuda paskined now, and that's why he was matter the oil. When we had the mashma sha'ishim sha'asru koidim Rabbi Yehuda, could go and Talmidei Shamai Hillel, who are the origins of this gzera. So Tosfos is revealing to us what the Gemara is going to say soon, that it was the Talmidei Shamai and Hillel that made this gzera not to be able to use oil of a goy. They must have held, they must have held nois and tam lefgam is aser. And if also Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi came and said v'savar mutter, and he said nois and tam lefgam is mutter. U'Shmuel savar kavusei. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi that nois and tam lefgam is mutter. So you machzik divrei Rabbi Samloi, because he gave credence, he agreed with the words of Rabbi Samloi that nowadays they were mater shemen of a goy. The problem is going to the end of this fourth line of Tosfos. V'diktik ri heich bo lachlik al Rabbi Seinu Shamai veHillel b'din nois and tam lefgam latirei. How could Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya argue under Friedrich Bezdin of Shamai and Hillel to be mater nois and tam lefgam when we're saying that Shamai and Hillel must have held that it's aser? V'diktik ri heich bo lachlik al Rabbi Seinu Shamai veHillel b'din nois and tam lefgam latirei. He the shemen yochel yos shemuter mitam sholei poshat vein reva tzibur yochelen lamoid. It's possible that you can say that the gzera never held, it never took, and you could say that it's gzera shein reva tzibur yochelen lamoid because most of the oil available were made by goyim. You could say all that, but nois and tam lefgam, how could you say they're arguing on the Friedrich Bezdin of Shammai and Hillel? B'shar dvorim hey chuter. That's one kasha. And Tosfos another kasha as well. Anyway, so near lekach near lari. I'm going down a couple of lines. The first word on the line that I'm looking at is near lari. Lekach near lari. The Shmuel nami svirle. Shmuel also must hold the chigozer beishamai basil ala shemen. The gzera that beishamai and basil made on shemen was not only because of nois and tam lefgam is aser. Rather, it's mishum chasnus gozar. It's the same reason as other things that they geyser, that we don't want you to get too chummy with goyim. Using their oil will allow you to eat by them and enjoy sudas with them, and that could lead to chasus. That's the real reason. We'll all agree that drinking wine together with them, that's a much more concerning issue. You partying with them, but oil, that's something that will create chasus? Not really. And therefore, they needed a secondary reason to support the reason of chasnus. Even Shammai and Hillel, who made the gzera to prohibit the wine of a goy, the oil of a goy, they also hold that nois and tam lefgam is muter. So why did they ask her? Because they really wanted to ask about chasnus, but since there's not such a severe threat of chasnus using the oil of a goy, they also said that maybe we should be makbid on the notion tam of gam as well. So v'chein zeh b'shmuel shemikoyach shnei hataimim gozru. There's two reasons together that made the threat big enough that they decided to prohibit the oil of a goy. Even though each reason by itself would not have compelled them to asr the oil of a goy, but when we have both these reasons working together, that's why they asred it. And that's what Shmuel was telling Rav. According to me, where the origins of this gzera is not how you made the Nil. It's much more recent. Al Shamai be Hillel Gazer. It's weiter a gzera of Tanoim. Mitami the precious, for the combined reasoning of Chasnus and Nois and Tam of Kam. Nicha de Yochel Leo Shehiter Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. There, it's reasonable to suggest that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was mater keneged Shamai and Hillel, kamoishim afarash Talmud b'samuch, like the Gemara will explain shortly. The leposhat isurei. You don't have the problem of ein bezin. A bezin cannot reverse something that an earlier bezin said, because when Shammai and Hillel made the prohibition of the oil of a goy, it didn't really take. It wasn't proliferated amongst Klal Yisrael, so it wasn't really being mevat laminik because the minik never took. The gam hataimim loy niru loy. The reasoning why Beishamai Misil Aserd was chasnus and nois tam of gam. Rabbi Yehuda argues ki ein tam chasnus toiv kol kach. There's not really a concern with oil of chasnus. V'oi the nois tam of gam mutter, but technically we pass the nois tam of gam as mutter. El didoch, but you Rav, the Omer Daniel Gazer Lov, that this gzera is a gzera kadmoinim. It was there for hundreds of years before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Hey, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi levatla. How could Rabbi Yehuda Nasi be mevatla gzera that Daniel, the Navi, made? The kivin sheksuva hi b'Torah, since it's written in the Torah, and of course Toshus means if it's in ksuvim, it's in the Torah, and we're going to soon see the psukim in Daniel that indicate that there was such a gzera made. The kivin sheksuva hi b'Torah pshitahu the pashat isurei b'chol Yisrael. You can't say that this prohibition did not proliferate amongst all of Klal Yisrael, because if it's written in the Torah, it must have been proliferated. Shammai and Hillel were more than 300 years later than Daniel. They added to the Gzera, as we'll soon see. There must have been accepted already. So the kasha is that Shmuel is asking to Rav, if you hold that the origins of this Isser, of Shemen, of a Goy, stems from Daniel, how could Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi reverse that? So you know what Rav answered? Who is the makar of the fact that it was reserved? It was Rab Simloi. Zokt Rav, very dismissive. Simloi? You're asking me a kasha from Rab Simloi? Ludo Kamrit. You know where he comes from? He comes from the city of Lud. You can't trust someone from Lud. Shiny Ludoi, the Mizalzul. People from Lud are Mizalzul and Takanos. So I'm denying that there was reverse. Rabbi Yehuda never reversed it. Fakert, the Takana is still in its strength. From Lud, he was the one who said that the Rimvatal Dominik. It's not true. So that was a very dismissive comment that Rav said about Shmuel. So Shmuel said, Amalei, Ashlechle. Oh, really? You hold that Shmuel from Lud should be ignored because he's a Mazazel? Should I let Reb Shmuel know what you're saying about him? Rav said, no, don't tell him. I didn't mamish mean it. Don't tell him. So it's an interesting comment that we don't expect out of Rav, and then he says, Nishkamein, I meant him. In general, but about Reb Shmuel, I never meant to say anything against him. Please don't say over what I said to Reb Shmuel. So Amar Rav, Zot Rav, Imheim loy darshu, Adan loy darshinan. Even if you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rashi says, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi loy darshu samikra, lo havin shedaniel gazer alav. Even if you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not darshan this pasuk to show us that this gzera is mimeh kadmoinim, it's from the dames of Daniel, the sovereign the Medina achrina gazer alav. And you're going to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi thought that the whole source of the Isser for oil is much more recent, and it's Mishum Slifas, Kalim Visharia, and he was martyred because it was a more recent Gzer because of Slifas Kalim, Anan Loy Deshinan. Why wouldn't we dashin? In other words, I'm going to show you that there's a pasuk that shows that this Gzer is from Bimei Daniel, and it's definitely proliferated, and there's no way Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would have been allowed to reverse such a Gzer. It says in Sefer Daniel, believe it or not, there are psukim in Sefer Daniel that are Lashon Kodesh that you could understand that are not Aramaic. And it says right in the first parak of Daniel, it says, Vayosam Daniel aliboy. Daniel put on his heart, he was very concerned to eat from the tarfus of the Beis Malchus. Asher lo yiskoil, he shouldn't become disgusting inside. Bipas bag hamelach, from the bread of the melech, ubiyayin, and from the wine of the melech, it says ubiyayin mishtov, the wine of his drinks, plural. What two drinks are there? Wine is only one drink. Sok the Gemara b'shtei mishtois hakosef medaber. The pasuk is referencing two types of drinks. There's wine, but there's also oil referred to into this pasuk. Echad mashke yayin, echad mishta yayin, ve'echad mishta shemen. And that's where you see Bimeach Hedmoinim from the times of Daniel. There was such a Gzera and nobody could reverse it. Rav Savar Al Liboy is some V'ulachol Yisrael Hayr. Rav patched this pasuk. Daniel put it on his heart not to drink the oil from a goy, but it also means that he paskined for all of Klal Yisrael that they're not allowed to drink oil. Therefore, this issue comes min be'kadmoinim and you cannot reverse it. Ushmuel Savar Al Liboy some. It was only a personal issue that Daniel did for himself. So in fact, there was no Gzeres HaKadmoinim. That pasuk that seems to indicate a prohibition against oil was only a personal Kabbalah that Daniel did for himself, but he never made a takana for everybody. So now we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel as to if Daniel was the one who instituted the new prohibition against oil from a goy, and that would determine whether or not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would have been able to reverse that.
You don't hear many gezeres from that period of time.
So it's very interesting you mentioned that because Rabbi Rosner said that there's even something that's called, there's several examples of a deraisa gezerah. Like we're going to soon see yichud is also midaraisa because it could lead to a bia. So that's like there are even certain isurim that are in the Torah that are only because the Torah wants to keep us away from another one.
Well, why do you call that a derisa?
We're going to soon see today that there are psukim that prohibit yichud.
But 1 minute. So,
but it's not, I'm not saying that it's
so Moshe Rabbeinu didn't teach that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't teach that to his Talmidim?
Teach what?
The idea of yichud.
He must have, because it was in the Torah.
Okay, so what is it, a remez, or we learn it explicit, or is it implicit?
I'm sorry?
Is it explicit in the psukim, or is it implicit?
It's not explicit. It's not explicit, but it's still considered a deraisa. We've learned from the Chumash. So there is such a thing. There is such a thing. So let's see what the Gemara says. Frank the Gemara, V'Shem and Daniel Gozar. So now we're coming back at Rav. So you still maintain, Rav, that the makor of the prohibition of using goyish oil is from Daniel. V'Yomar Bali Avimai Nusa. So this is an interesting name. Bali Avimai Nusa Mishmei the Rav, in the name of Rav. So this is Rav himself. And he said the following: Piton, the bread of a goy, the shamnan, the oil of a goy, yenan, the wine of a goy, uvenoiseyan, and the daughters of goyim, kulon mishmoina osar davarhin. They are all from those known 18 items. What are these 18 items? Zokt Rashi shmoina osar davar Beis Shamai ubeis Hillel yachad nimnu v'gozru alein b'per Kamad Shabbos. The first parak of Shabbos, the Gemara relates a story that Beis Shamai and Beis Hillel got together and they answered 18 things. And one of the 18 things that they answered was Piton, Shamnon, Yenon, Uvenoiseim. Rashi points out, Benoiseim marrying a Goyish, a girl, marrying a Goy, that Isur Deraisa. So the Gemara is going to deal with that on the base. But Al Kalpanim, you see that the origins of the prohibition to use Goyish oil comes from Shamai and Hillel. It doesn't come from the Kadmonim, from Daniel. And this is Rav talking. Zok to Gemara, V'chitema, also Daniel, Gozar, V'lakibel. If you're going to say, yeah, sure, Daniel answered it, but it was never proliferated. And also Talmidei the Hill v'Shamai v'Gozar v'Kibel. And when the Talmidei Hill and Shamai reinstituted the Gzeira, that was accepted by Klal Yisrael. Well, then in Cain, Maya Seduse, the Rav. So Ebezoi, what is Rav saying? As Rashi points out, the Omar, the Daniel Gozar, why would Rav say that the Makor of the Isser for oil of a Goy is because Daniel was Goyzer? Even the Dori Lekavomine Lav Gzeri. If the Dor of Daniel didn't accept that Gezerah and it wasn't accepted until Shammai and Hill, so then it shouldn't be attributed to Daniel, it should be attributed to Shammai and Hill. Zok to Gemara, Ella, what must be pshat according to Rav, is Daniel Gazer Alov Be'ir. Daniel said in the ear, we already learned earlier that in the ear, there's a much greater need to be Gozer al Chasnus, because that's a place where people are where they can get together. But travels on the way in a rest area where it's unlikely that would lead to Chasnus, there's no Gzer. So Daniel instituted the Gzer Be'ir. Also Inu and Shammai and Hill came and upped the ante and increased the Gzer of a Gozer Afilu Besada. They answered oil of a Goy even Besada. So that's how Rav learns that the Gzer comes from the Yemei Kadmonim, but it was expanded in the days of Shammai. Break the Gemara of Rabbi Yehuda Nosi, Hechi Motzi LeMishra Takanta the Talmidei Shammai. Even you, Shmuel, who hold that it's not a Gzer Yemei Kadmonim from Daniel, it's a Gzer from Shammai and Hill. Well, Shammai and Hill were before Rabbi Yehuda Nosi, and why don't you have the same problem? V'tanan ein bezdin yochel levatel divrei bezdin chaverai elam kain gadoil hemenu b'chachmo v'minyan. The same problem that Shmuel attacked Rav with, if it's a gzera from Yimei Kadmonim, you can't reverse it. Well, guess what? Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are also considered Yimei Kadmonim when you're comparing them to Rabbi Yehuda Nosi, who was a later bezdin. So how does Shmuel understand how Rabbi Yehuda Nosi was able to reverse it? We have another problem. Even if you have what you need, if you have minyan, you have chachma, so you could overrule an earlier takana. But that's a regular takana. But the Shemaina Aser Davar that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel made were off the charts important, and those nobody can reverse. Chutz mishmoina aser davar shafilu yavai Elio beis dinai ein shaymin lei. Even if Elio and his bezdin come, you would not accept it from him to reverse the gzera. Even if, and there are Mefarshim who say what it means is afilu yavai Elio beis dinai ein shaymin lei means, what if Elio comes and he tells you that Mashiach's coming tomorrow? So you might think, from now until tomorrow, maybe there's no Isur Chasnos, there's no concern, even then it would be Asr. You were never allowed to reverse it. That's how severe the Gzeras of Shammai and Hill were, those 18 in particular. So therefore, the question is, how was Rabbi Yehuda Nosi able to reverse it? Amar Basharsha Matam, Ba'elu Pashad Yisrael B'Rav Yisrael. The reason why these Gzeras are so severe is because they were proliferated. Everybody accepted these gzeras. But Shemen, even when Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel made these gzera on Shemen, leposhat Yisur b'Rav Yisrael, and since the gzera wasn't accepted in all of Klal Yisrael, it was still able to be reversed. The Amar Rab Shmuel bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Yoshvu Rabbeinu Ubatku al Shemen. The Rabbanim checked it out to see if this was a gzera that was accepted. Shaloi Pashat Isurei B'Rav Yisrael. The Gzera didn't spread out. It didn't take. And therefore, B'samchu Rabbi Sheinu al Divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel al Divrei Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. Shayoyim, they used to say, in Goyim Gzer ala Tzibur Ela and Kain Roiv Tzibur Yechoyin Lamida. You cannot make a Gzera unless it's something that the oilim will be able to live with. But not living with oil of a goy, which is really the main source of oil, that's something that's too much, and therefore they're going to reverse it. Let's have a quick look at the last line in Tosfos, all the way at the bottom of the daf, to understand a little bit what's so special about these Gzeros of Shamai Basil that they were irrevocable. So I'm going to look all the way down to the last line on the Amud, and Tosfos says, those 18 things that Shamai Basil prohibited, afilu gadol einay mevatel, even if they're a greater bezin, they can't be mevatel. They put their life on the line for these 18 Gzeros. What does that mean? They put their life on the line? Now, literally, what it means is they were arguing about whether or not to institute these Gzeros, and they literally were fighting each other with swords. It probably means the proverbial sword. They were fighting Melchamto Shel Torah. But it was a huge, huge controversy when they made these Gzeros, and therefore these Gzeros carry a lot of weight and they cannot be reversed. Nevertheless, Gemara, since this particular Gzera of Shemen, which was also from those 18, was never really welcomed by Klal Yisrael, it was able to be reversed. The Omer of Adabar Ava Mikra. It says in the pasuk as follows. Let's turn now on to Amud Beis. It says in the pasuk, "B'me'era atam ne'orim," because Baruch tells Klal Yisrael, "Atem mekabelim aleichem gzeira ba'oru uveklola v'nesar aleichem." You were mekabel upon yourself, Klal Yisrael, these gzeiras, and now va'oisi atem koivim hagoy kuloi, and now is it Rashi v'achach oisi atem koivim. Goizlim, you steal from me, you deny from me. Shatem mehenim shuvin arurim. I don't understand. If you are all makabelit, how come now you're complaining about it? But the lashon pasuk is v'oizyatim kovim hagoy kulai. The entire nation was makabel, and now Kadosh Baruch says you want to back out. But you see, the lashon of the pasuk is hagoy kulai, and therefore. We learn Ika Goy Kuloi in the only time a Takana takes, if it's Goy Kuloi, Eloi, Loi. But if all of Klal Yisrael doesn't accept it, that is not considered. That doesn't mean that it's not a Gzeira at all. It means it's a Gzeira that does have to be adhered to, but that is what a Bezin can reverse. As Tosha says right on top. Pirish Einei Chalak Yishar Gzeiris. If it wasn't accepted by all of Klal Yisrael, it won't be chal with the same severity as all other Gzeiris. And that you could be mevatel even with a bezdin that's smaller than the original bezdin, they could be mevatel it. It doesn't mean you could totally ignore it. It means it's a gzeira that later chachamim, if they see fit, can reverse. Even Shemen, even though it wasn't proliferated, but there was still no Isser, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had to come and proclaim that it's mutter before they were able to be mad. Now we see over here that the level of chumrah when it comes to Gzeris is huge. Where does it come from? So there's a beautiful Meshech Chochmah on Parshas Bechukosai. It's the famous Meshech Chochmah of Ich bin ein Berliner. People, the reason why Gzeros were made, the Meshech Chochmah explains, is because we once had a beautiful presentation right before Purim about the Kima V'Kiblu. That was what kept Klal Yisrael intact throughout all of the years of Golus, and it's only that's able to sustain us in our Golus, where we don't have such Gilui Shechina. We need guidance. We need to accept the fact that Chazal could make up their own things in order. Chazal means even in our days. If it's Chazal, it's Chai Shlita. we accepted upon ourselves that the Batei Dinim and the Rabbanim of our time, in every generation, they could institute things, and it's only that will hold us together as a nation, so that we're there when it comes to Mashiach. And it's this concept, this theme that the Meshech Chochmah talks about. And he says that you know who started making Xeris? The first person who started making Xeris was Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu saw that we need to protect the integrity of Klal Yisrael. And Yaakov Avinu told his children, whatever comes, do not bury me in Mitzrayim. Yaakov was already afraid. We're going to be lost in Mitzrayim. We're going to get lost there. We'll get diluted there. We'll get intermarried there. There'll be nothing left of us. But if I proclaim I don't want to be buried in Mitzrayim, I'm telling everybody that our future, the future of Klal Yisrael, is not in Mitzrayim. The future, we have a much brighter and greater future. And it's a gzera to protect the integrity of Klal Yisrael. So all of these gzeras are all there. They're part of the Kimu Kiblu to protect the integrity of Klal Yisrael. And the Meshech Chochmah says there, when people are going to start saying, Ich bin ein Berliner, people are touching nationalistic pride of Germany in those days, the Meshech Chochmah prophetically actually predicts the Holocaust. He says, then we're going to get wiped off the face of the earth because we're starting to get lost and we're starting to become Berliners and rather than Eden. And it's this koich that Chazal has that we gave them with the Kimu V'Kiblu that allows Klal Yisrael to be around because the gzeres that they make protect our integrity, so we should be there to be Makabel Pnei Mashiach when the right time comes, which would come with Korev Mamash. So I thought that was a nice, the Meshech Chochmah is very nice compliments what Rav David said before Purim in his explanation of the Kimu V'Kiblu. Okay. David, I hope I'm saying it over properly, what you said, like Kimu V'Kiblu, but it's a beautiful theme, and the Meshech Chochmah expands on it.
It's basically correct, right? There's a lot more to it, but you've got the basics there.
The Meshech Chochmah is probably saying in Shamai, oh, look, I'm right. David Dolty said
Okay.
So now let's get back to Bali's statement. Guf Amar Bali Amar Vimai Nusa Mishmei Rav. Piton V'Shemnon Yenon Uvenaisein are Kula Mishmeina Aser Doverhead. Now I shouldn't say this on the recording, but there's a famous joke that people say that when people travel to do dry zachen that you can't be maktabra when you're traveling. Chol of Yisrael, Pas Yisrael, and Bas Yisrael. So Zok the Gemara, Pitan v'Shemnon Yenon of Nesnen Kulan Mishmoina Aser Doverhead. They're all from these 18 things that are very severe, which incidentally the joke's not even good because not only is it prohibited be'ir, it's also prohibited besada, which means when you're traveling. So Zok the Gemara, B'naisein Mahi. Where is the Zara? Where is the Isser of B'naisein? Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Gazru al B'nai. Because the question is, what do you mean the Asher B'naisein? We know there are Asher B'naisein. Zok the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Gazru al B'naisein Nidois Me'arisusam. The moment a Bas Nachri is born, they have the din of Anida. That was the Gzeira. Ugniva Mishmei the Rav Amar Kulal Mishum Avoidis Kechavim Gazru Ben. The reason why all of these things are usher are because they could ultimately lead to avodah zara. Because once there's chasnus will lead to avodah zara. The chiyasar of Acha bar Ad Amar Rav Yitzchak Gazru al Piton Mishum Shamnon. Why were they geyser on Pas Mishum Shamnon? Because of their oil. Frankly, more I don't understand. Why would Shemen be more of a concern than Pas? My ulmei the Shemen mi Pas. Ella, what it means is al piton vishamnon mishum yenan. Wine is really the biggest concern of chasnus. Bread and oil, which aren't as severe concerns, we were geyser on them. Chazal was geyser on them, or Shamai Misol was geyser on them because if they eat pas and shemen with the guy, it's going to lead them to drink wine with the guy as well. Val yenan, why did they prohibit drinking the wine of a guy? Mishum b'nei seyan, because it's going to lead to chasnus. And what's the problem when people marry non-Jewish girls? Because of something else, and on another something else because of another something else. So first we need to know what the davar acher is that we have concerned with b'nesem, and we're going to soon see it means avodah zarah. And then there's a whole new prohibition, whole new thing that's also about davar acher mishum davar acher. There's some A that's also because of B, which the Gemara will explain later. Frankly, Gemara ben Isaiah, how could you say that there's a gzeira not to marry goyish women? Doiraisihi. That's a mafurish apostle. The chesed is chatin vom. You're not allowed to marry a goyta. You're not allowed to marry with goyim. So we're saying that's a gzeira. Zok Gemara doiraisa zayinumus. Midoiraisa, the only prohibition is with the 7 umos. Avo shar oivdei kechavim, but a regular goy loy, the Torah does not ask for that. But also inu v'gazer afilu the shar oivdei kechavim. And the Zara B'Shamai and Hillel was you're not even allowed to marry any goy. Pray to Gemara, Ul Shimon Yoichi, the Omar, Ki Yasser es bincha me'acharei. The Torah says, don't marry a guy because she's going to turn your son away from the Torah. L'Rabbi's Kol HaMesiros, which asks her anyone who could turn your way away from the Torah, which means any guy, not just from the Shiva Amamim. So that means all goyim. There's an Isra Chasnus Midaraisa. Ma'ikal Meimer. What did Shamai and Basil add? The Chasnus, if Chasnus was already also Minat Torah. Ella, what we have to say is Daraisa Ishus Derech Chasnus. Midaraisa, there's an Isra to actually make house with a goya, marry her, and live together long term. That's when there's an Isra. However, but also Inu B'Shamai and Hillel said Gazar Afilu Derech Shnus. You're not even allowed to have a one-night stand with a goita. That was the Gzeira of B'Shamai and B'Silo. The Isra in the Torah was to actually marry them. Frankly, more that's not true either, because Nus Nami the Vezdina Shel Shem Gasu. Nus with the Goya is not a new Isra that B'Shamai and B'Silo made. It was already also from the Bezin of Shem. That's a very old Gzeira already. Yomer Yehuda. And I guess the assumption was that she had znus with a goy. Ella, what you have to say is the Raisa Oivet Kechavim Habal Bas Yisrael the Moshcha Basrei. Midaraisa, the Gzeir of Shem was only if a Jewish woman will have znus with a goy, she'll be influenced. A wife is very much influenced by her husband, so that's where they made a Gzeir. But a yid who's mezana on a white night stand with a goya, loy, that wouldn't have been Nasser. But also Inu and Shamai and Basil came along and said, or Shamai and Hill came along and said, Gazer afilu Yisrael habal ha'vedis kechavim. Even a one night stand, znus with a goya is going to be awesome.
What Shem are we talking about here?
We're talking about Shem V'Aver. Way back.
Shem V'Aver. There's no such thing as a Jew and a goy.
I guess it means anybody who has loyalties with the Rebbeinu Shalom versus somebody who doesn't.
So
just yeshiva, so he must have had loyalty to the Rebbeinu Shalom.
So with the Navid Avoda Zara, and you mentioned Yehuda also. So how do you count for Yehuda? And
Yehuda was, I guess Yehuda's was paskening based on Xer that he must have had from Shem V'Aver. The Gemara is assuming that Yehuda's psak of Yisrael is based on the Besin of Shem. I mean, why didn't the Gemara say that this is the Besin of Yehuda? I guess we are assuming that Yehuda would have the authority of these issues of Torah law probably always went back to Shem. He was the main yeshiva.
Right, but we're just presuming. What are we supposed to assume? Because he married a woman from a family that we never heard of before.
Tamar.
Not even Tamar. Before Tamar.
But I guess all of those women.
His first wife.
They were probably not Avedis Kechavim. They probably didn't serve idols.
Right. So we have to make that.
Was there like pagans, or you either were Jewish or you were Avodah Zara? Was there anyone who was just like not?
I don't think there's such a thing as secular in those days.
It's funny you say that because I once asked like the person from Jews for Judaism, Julius is. I once asked him, what is harder? Is it harder to be Mekayr of somebody who's Tamfry, like what or Shamai and Eshet do, or is it harder to get back somebody that's Jews for Judaism? So he said it's much, much harder to make someone who's Tamfry from. Eshet job is much harder than our job. You know why? Because the sign of someone who's fry means I don't want to be governed by religion. They're lazy. They don't want to accept authority. That's very hard to change. But our targets are people who are accepting a higher authority. We just have to show them that they're mistaken. But there are already people who are motivated to accept a higher authority. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So Zog the Gemara. But that's also was also from way before Shamai and Hillel. Yisrael Abala Ben Gechavim is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That is also the Amar, like we just learned last week. Haboil Aramis Kanoim Poigamboy. Someone who's boil Aramis Kanoim Poigamboy obviously can't be allowed. If it was allowed, why would there be Kanoim Poigamboy? Zok the Gemara Dairaisa Befarhesia. Yes, there's a Kanoim Poigamboy if someone's boil Aramis, but that's only if he does it in public. Like the story of Zimri and Cosby. But also Inu and Shamai Hill came along. They were gozer afilu b'tzina. Even if no one knows about it privately, it's also usher to have relations, even if it's a one-night stand with a goya. That's already the bezdin of the Chashmonoim were gozer again long before Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The Chiyasa Rabdimi Amar Bezin Shal Chashmonoi Gozru Yisrael Abala Betzkechavim Chayiv. A Yisrael who has relations with a Goya is Chayiv. Mishum Nashka. It's Xera Machmas. 4 different things. It's Xera. Somebody will come to live with his wife who is a Nida. It's Xera Otu. Someone who's going to live with a Shivcha. Otu. Somebody who's going to live with a Goya. And Otu. Somebody who's going to live with an Eishishish. So they asked the Goya Otu that it would lead to these other terrible averis, and Kiyasa Rabban Mishum Nashkaz. It would lead to the same 3 surim, but instead of Eishishish, Zayin is Zoina, a coin having relations with the Zoina, which is awesome. So Zok Gemara Baiter, Ki Gozu Beis Dino Shal Chashmonoi, that was only Bia. Aval Yichud Loi. The Beis Chashmonoi asked it was also when you make Chashmonoim to be Boil a Goya, but even Betzina, but Yichud was Nasser, Inu Gazar Afilu Yichud. They said even Yichud is Nasser. Frank Gemara, Yichud Nami Beis Dino Shal David Gazru. Yichud also Bezdin of David with Gozer. When Amnon raped his sister, at that time they made a gzer that people shouldn't be living together, people shouldn't be secluded together anymore. Gozer al Yichud. Hasam Yichud the Bas Yisrael. The Israel Yichud that they prohibited was with a Bas Yisrael who's an erva to you. But the yichud of a goy loy that was never usher. There was never an issue to be miyachad with a goya. They answered even yichud with a goya. Frank Gemara yichud the Bas Yisrael deraisa. Yichud with a Bas Yisrael is deraisa. One second. Is a Raisa? He's the Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shimon Tzadok. Remez leyichud v'natar minayim. So how could you say that the yichud of Abbas Yisrael was already developed in the times of the Beis Din Shel David? We have a pasuk that prohibits yichud. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Shimon Tzadok. Remez leyichud v'natar minayim. Shenemar ki yisischa achicha ben imecha. If your brother is maces you, he convinces you to avoid Zara. But which brother? Your mother's son. Why didn't the Torah say Ben Av? The Torah says a ben's allowed to be secluded with his mother. But you're not allowed to be miyachad with any erba. So you see clearly that even in the Torah there's a prohibition of yichud. So what do you mean the best of David created this gesera? Yichud Araisa is the Eisha Shish. The yichud that the Torah is referring to of ki yisischa achicha bani mecha is only for the Eisha Shish. Also, David the Gazer afilu ayichud the pnuya. David said even a pnuya one may not be miyachad with, and then also Talmidei Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel Gazer they added afilu ayichud doivedes kechon. So that takes care of the isser of B'nai son from an isser to marry them, which we do from the pasuk. The maskana is that it's the isser yichud for a guy. Zog to Gemara weiter. Zog to Gemara weiter. What about that last takana mentioned? Val dovar achar mishum dovar achar. A is also because of B. What is A? What is B? Amar B'Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Gazur al tinik oibet kachavim sheyitama beziva. A goy, a male goy, anytime you touch him, he's tama beziva. Shelo yehei tinuk Yisrael rogel etzloi b'mishkav zachar. We don't want our children near their children because they're aduk and mishkav zachar. So by saying that they have a tama beziva, it's automatically going to make our children stay away from it. Domar Abzera. So al dovar acher mishum dovar acher. There are geyser that a tinnik of Ovid Gechavim has a din of a zav, because we're worried about dovar acher, we're worried about mishkav zachar. Domar Abzera tsar gadol hayali. I had a lot of trouble trying to get an explanation for this, to get an answer for this question that I have, which we'll soon see what this question was. But I had difficulty, Eitzel Rabasi, to get an answer for this question for Rabasi. Rabasi ate Rabbi Yochanan. Rabasi had the same question, and he couldn't get an answer from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan ate Rabbi Yanan, Rabbi Yanan ate Rabbi Nosan, Rabbi Amram, Rabbi Nosan and Amram ate Rabbi. And what was the question that they couldn't get an answer to? Tinuk oivet kechavim me'emosay b'tama beziva. At what age is this halacha that a goy is metama beziva? At what age? The moment this child was born, this child is tamei al ziva. But when I came to Reb Chia, Amar Li, it's ben tesh shanim v'yoy mechad. Only once the child is already 9 years old and he's roy labia. Once he's roy labia, then and only then do we give him a status of a zava or of a zov. Uchashabasi v'ertzeisi devarai lefnei Rebbe. And when I explained this, when I told this to Rebbe, Amar Li, he said, Hanach devarai, ignore what I have to say, meaning that it's already ben yoymai. The achayis diver Reb Chia the Amar Tindik over the Kechavim Amos Mitame Beziva then Tesh Shanim via Mechad because he's royal Ziva, because he's royal Labia. So halacha the Gemara is remaining with is that the only type of goyish child that's Mitame Beziva is only once he's 9 years old, because only then is there a concern that it could lead to Mishkav Zah. Baruch Hashem, we were Zoicha finish Daf Lamet Ches. Tomorrow we're going to learn Daf Lamet Tes. I think tomorrow it's also going to be online. I don't think I'm going to make it back. I'm going to probably make it back from Lakewood later on Friday, on Erev Shabbos. So once again, tomorrow we will learn online. And today I'm not learning at 9 o'clock. And I don't know if I'll be able to learn at 9 o'clock tomorrow either. Okay, everybody should have an awesome, awesome day.